Tilbury is going to be the downfall of her own brand. Yes, she is at it again, being petty again. And truly, I don't know who on her team is approving these interviews and these videos, but they are not a good look. So that's what I want to talk about today. We're going to go into so many examples from the last few years where Charlotte Tilbury or her team has either spoken very negatively about other beauty brands duping her, and also a lot of the legal battles that she has been in behind the scenes against other beauty brands. And starting with the most recent example, a podcast that she was just on where a soundbite from it has now gone viral, where Charlotte has spoken very negatively about dupes. I will say, I tried to do kind of a Charlotte Tilbury inspired look today. The very glam makeup, I used a ton of her products, all like Pillow Talk shades. I tried to go with that like Charlotte Tilbury pink Pillow Talk look because I do think it's really pretty. And while I will say I do like most of her products, I don't think a lot of them are worth the price tag, especially in today's beauty landscape when there are so many amazing options. And that is really the crux of this. Charlotte trying to justify the price tag of her products to a very skeptical consumer in a sea of high quality beauty products. Which brings us to that podcast. Okay, so this was the Shameless podcast. I do not listen to this podcast. However, I have seen this clip circulating the internet, which led me to go and listen to the episode. Now, I will say the clip that's circulating is specifically Charlotte talking about dupes, but the episode is about a lot of different topics. It's about Charlotte's life, her building the brand. It's not just about dupes, but this piece of the interview is the one that the internet has grabbed a hold of. And I can see why.
When I look at some of the dupes out there, I'm just like, sorry, I get really upset. I get really upset as a creative, as that I want to empower the consumer. When I have seen with my expert eye and tested with my scientists, those products will dehydrate your skin and literally, they do everything I didn't dream for them to do, whether it's a beauty light wand where I wanted it to kind of like smooth and not sit in any lines or pores or dehydrate your skin or steal from your skincare that you had on beforehand. That for me was like, no, that's not what I want to do. And when you do that, duping is not, I own my formulas. I own the IP. I own the technology of my formulas. Duping is basically literally trying to sell people something that it doesn't do what it does. They're duping the consumer.
Okay, now first of all, this is not the first time Charlotte has spoken about dupes or voiced her frustration with them. There are endless examples that we're going to get to near the end of the video. Like, this has been all she's been talking about recently. And with most of the comments I've heard her share about dupes, we kind of hear this faux sense of authority, like, I've created these with my scientists. The other products could never do what my products do.
And tested with my scientists, those products will dehydrate your skin.
Which we know is simply not true. I think there's this vision here that she's trying to paint to the consumer that she's in the lab with these scientists and no one else is doing anything like that, when in reality, these beauty brands that have copied Charlotte Tilbury have also worked with very talented cosmetic chemists to dupe the products. It's not like Charlotte has this special access to ingredients that no other brand could use. And in my experience, after trying so many of the Charlotte Tilbury dupes for various products, I find that most of them are pretty comparable. Yes, there are differences, but for the average consumer, I don't think the difference will be big enough to justify the difference in price. But that's not what Charlotte thinks. This is what else she had to say. When people try to dupe, duping is basically literally trying to sell people something that doesn't do what it does. They're duping the consumer. And by duping the consumer, when the consumer goes to put it on their face, you remember they've never worn a glow before and they look spackled or cracked or drying. It's sitting in their lines and pores and doing everything that I never wanted a Hollywood Flawless filter to do. She later goes on to say, I get really upset for the consumer, which makes me laugh because I'm like, do you get upset for the consumer or do you get upset for your bottom line? But that is language she continued to use throughout the interview, like empowering the consumer. I get very upset for the consumer. They're duping the consumer. I would have more sympathy truly if she was like, I don't like this. I don't like that they're taking my products and my formulas and trying to recreate them. That's not fair to me or my business. I actually would have so much more sympathy for that than I do her trying to twist it around and saying, oh, well, they're actually like playing the consumer. They're being duped. No, they're not. She also goes on to say that dupes change the relationship that the consumer has with themselves, almost suggesting that it makes the consumer insecure when certain makeup products don't perform or look good on them the way that Charlotte Tilbury products could. She says, brands, go out there and live your dream and create what you want to do. But when you dupe someone and it's not to the elevation or the luxury or the performance of how something I created, the innovation to perform on your face, and it does that, it actually changes the relationship with the consumer and themselves. She goes on to give the example of like someone trying, well, she didn't say any brands, but let's just say e.l.f., kind of implied here e.l.f., trying the e.l.f. highlight wand and thinking it looks dry on their face and then assuming that they can't wear that product because it doesn't look good on them. And she feels because of this, the consumer is being duped because according to her, the Charlotte Tilbury version would look good on the consumer and they're being deceived by purchasing the inferior dupe. And like I said, this was just a small clip from a much larger interview. I will leave it linked down below, but the clip, as I said, has circulated online, mostly on TikTok, but it's also gotten some attention over on Instagram. And I have to say, especially on TikTok, the comments are not great. I scrolled for a very long time and I really couldn't find anything positive or in defense of Charlotte Tilbury. I would say most comments that I was seeing were saying, you know, make your products cheaper if you don't want people to dupe them. I will say when it comes to the response of just make it cheaper, I do think sometimes it's missing the full picture, and I don't think it's always realistic for a brand to make something as cheap as a dupe can, especially because that original product that's getting duped was the one that had to do the research and development, had to do the market research to figure out what the consumer wanted, and that is all costly to do. So of course a brand could dupe something cheaper. Again, there's a lot more to that. I'm not using it fully as a defense for Charlotte Tilbury, but I do think it's unfair to just write it off and say, well, make it cheaper. But what I will say about Charlotte Tilbury doing these interviews, it's fascinating to me because I would imagine that they told her in advance these are the questions. If they didn't, I think that they should have, or Charlotte's team should have okayed what they could or could not ask her. And I would have advised her not to speak on dupes. Again, like I said, we're gonna get into this more later in the video, but she talks about dupes all the time. And I really just don't think it's a good look. You know, my degree is in PR, and if I was on her team, I would advise her never to address them. Because every time that she talks about them and tries to suggest that her products are better, she is unintentionally giving validity to the dupes. Because if her products really truly were so untouchable that they could stand on their own, she would not have to tell us that. There's this very paradoxical nature to the many statements she has made about dupes, where every time she talks about it, it actually does the opposite of what she's intending to do. But like I said, we will get back to that. But before we do, I want to talk about some litigation with other beauty brands, and also mention, if you did not know, I started a membership here on this channel. It is called Off the Record. It is a twice monthly series. It's a mini series. The episodes are like 7 to 10 minutes long, where I talk about all the beauty topics that don't make their way into a video each month. It's $2.99 to subscribe. You can click the join button on my page. There's no obligation. All my regular videos will still go up as usual, but this is just extra content. If you like this type of video, definitely consider subscribing to my membership. But okay, the litigation. Do you remember the skincare brand Pillow Talk Derm? Well, you may or may not know that they had to rebrand and change their name, and they are now Dr. Idris. So this skincare brand was created by dermatologist and skincare influencer Dr. Idris. And the name came about because she would always share the skincare advice while laying in bed, hence the name Pillow Talk Derm. And when she decided to start her skincare brand, she said that she was between two different names. She couldn't tell if she should go with her own name, Dr. Idris, or Pillow Talk Derm. So she asked her online community, they voted, and Pillow Talk Derm won. Well, in early 2024, she announced that she was rebranding. And while she didn't give much context, she alluded to the fact that a brand, and it was largely implied Charlotte Tilbury, came for her for using the name Pillow Talk. She mentioned how it cost her nearly hundreds of thousands of dollars to rebrand, and she is a self-funded brand. So she took all of that on to rename as Dr. Idris. Now again, she didn't share many details, but it's kind of implied here. And to be fair, Charlotte Tilbury does have a trademark on Pillow Talk, so she had to change her brand's name. Let me know what you think. I think the two are so disconnected, a consumer could never be confused between this skincare brand that looks nothing like Charlotte Tilbury and Pillow Talk is just slang. Like, yes, I do associate it with Charlotte Tilbury. I feel like they really nailed that phrase into the ground. But when it's paired on with the word derm, I really don't make the connection between Charlotte Tilbury. At least that's me, and that's where my brain goes. But let me know your thoughts. And recently, I don't think this one got a ton of buzz, but she also called out Huda Beauty after their launch of their new setting spray. So a creator posted a TikTok comparing the new Huda Beauty setting spray to the Charlotte Tilbury setting spray, made the comparison from a longevity standpoint and said that the Huda Beauty one was better, and specifically said it was the strongest setting spray ever. And to be clear, this was not a sponsored video. This was just organic content that creator made to compare the two setting sprays. Well then, Huda Beauty posted that video to their Instagram. They reposted it. And that's where the trouble started. So Charlotte Tilbury made a complaint to the National Advertising Division. And I will just say, as a pause, I keep saying Charlotte Tilbury. I'm talking about the brand. I don't think it was necessarily the Charlotte that we know on the phone, like, darling. I think with a lot of these, with the Dr. Idris, with the other examples I'm going to share, I'm not speaking necessarily about her. Obviously, she has a big brand. A lot of people are involved. She said in the podcast, her brand employs over 2,000 people. They're also owned by a massive conglomerate. So like, I don't mean Charlotte the person when I'm saying Charlotte Tilbury here, to be fair. But anyways, they made the complaint to the NAD, which I will start off by saying is not a government agency. However, brands can voluntarily comply to this to avoid legal action or FTC involvement, which is what Huda Beauty did. She was like, okay, I'll take the video down. I'll ask the creator to take the video down. And I have to just say, I think this is so silly and petty, and honestly, good on Huda Beauty for being the bigger person there, because who cares? Out of everything on the list today, that one was probably the most petty for me. I'm like, who cares? But we've also seen Charlotte Tilbury come for smaller brands, not just Huda Beauty. Very recently, we've seen two small indie brands share kind of threats from Charlotte Tilbury.
To cut a very long story short, it's basically my brand name, Airbrushed Skin. So we launched last year after 5 years formulating the brand, and everything was going really well. Sales were coming in, customers were really happy, and I trademarked the brand. So we heard nothing until November, and then since November last year, it's basically been this back and forth between us and Charlotte Tilbury. And when I reached out to a solicitor, they basically told us that we've got no chance in hell, mainly because of the fact that obviously they're a multi-million-pound industry and I'm just this small little business in a little town in Lincolnshire. My branding is nothing like theirs. I'm a skincare brand. My brand name is Airbrushed Skin, and they had a foundation product, a product called, it had the same airbrush in, not even airbrushed, but yeah. Apparently that's enough for the trademark. It means that I need to completely rebrand a brand that I literally spent 3 years just designing and getting all the packaging for. And yeah, it's just wild. It's just wild.
The founders shared that they had to give in because they didn't have the money to battle Charlotte Tilbury in court, especially because it would be just such an unfair fight. Charlotte Tilbury backed by this huge conglomerate versus this small independently owned brand. They did the same thing with Trigwell Cosmetics over their logo. Again, the Charlotte Tilbury logo is trademarked, but I don't think these are similar enough to cause confusion. I think it's just a C and a T. I think it was just such an unfair fight. But back to Charlotte Tilbury calling out dupes, which she really, really hates. Let's talk about a few recent examples. And I even just want to call back to the idea that everything on my list today is just from within the last 2 years. Like, all these examples of pettiness from Charlotte Tilbury are very recent. Starting with their reaction to e.l.f. Now, I talked about this one in a couple of videos, so I'll make it brief, but e.l.f. released a video titled Cosmetic Criminals, which, interestingly enough, I wonder if there was anything behind the scenes here, because that video has been pulled. It is scrapped. It is no longer on YouTube. The teaser video is still up, but the full video is gone. But it was a mockumentary about someone whose makeup was stolen, and then you have to figure out who stole the makeup. Like, it was a cute little video. e.l.f. has been doing more in media, so like that made sense. Well, very shortly after, Charlotte Tilbury did this very weird campaign on their Instagram, like, who stole the makeup? They sent out all these PR packages to influencers that were empty, and then the influencers are posting them going, there's nothing in this package. And then Charlotte Tilbury's like, who stole the makeup? And then it comes to the end, you find out Charlotte Tilbury's the one that stole the makeup, and she says, I stole it because nobody can steal my beauty DNA. They can try, but they cannot deny. And like, it's clear they're talking about mostly e.l.f., but a lot of other beauty brands that are duping them. But it was clear they were talking about e.l.f. because they really played off of that Cosmetic Criminals video that e.l.f. had just posted. Beyond this most recent podcast interview, they also have started calling themselves one of the most duped brands in the world. They've been using that language and everything recently. They had this like blurb on their website, how like no one can dupe them. They're one of the most duped brands in the world. They even did this social media campaign. I was finding sponsored videos from creators that included the talking point, one of the most duped brands in the world. So like, you know that when the creator received the brief for that, like they told them, we want you to say one of the most duped brands in the world, which again, just calls back to what I was saying earlier. I'm like, if it was true, you wouldn't have to say it. You know what I mean? There are lots of brands getting duped all the time, but you don't see them doing multi-part videos to shade the brands duping them. But again, we have more examples here. So she posted this video on her Instagram, putting one of her products into a copy machine, and then it just kept coming out with this error message being like, you can't copy this, you can't copy our products. Which again, I just find it funny because not only can you, but so many brands have. So much so to the point that Chemist Warehouse, which is an Australian store, posted a kind of response video taking the Charlotte Tilbury Hollywood Flawless Filter, putting it into a copy machine, and then printing out the many dupes for it. When I saw that copy machine video, I was like, someone needs to take Charlotte Tilbury's phone away from her. Like, we need to stop these posts. And again, I'm kidding. I know it's not Charlotte the person posting them, but I'm like, what are you doing? Like, this I know is supposed to be this like cheeky, funny moment, but that's not the way it's reading to consumers. They've also recently posted this legendary for a reason video on their YouTube, spelling out all these reasons why other brands could never compare to them, when in reality, lots of brands do compare to Charlotte Tilbury. There's really nothing unique about what Charlotte Tilbury is doing, so I find it fascinating that they're trying to convince the consumer that there is, and that their brand stands so far above every other beauty brand, when in reality, they're doing pretty normal things that a lot of their competitors are also doing.
11 years ago, I created my award-winning brand and revolutionized the beauty industry. So many brands, my darling, have tried to copy it, but darling, you can't fake that Tilbury feeling. They do not have my expertise, my science, or my premium quality ingredients. I invest in next generation, performance-driven, patented formulas in makeup, skincare, and fragrance. And I test them in dermatological and clinical trials on hundreds of skin tones. There are so many rigorous standards that have to be met. That's why they perform like nothing else.
Again, these things should speak for themselves. You shouldn't have to tell the consumer that you're the best out there.
Darlings, that was fabulous. You can try, but you cannot deny. There is only one Charlotte Tilbury.
But let me know your thoughts. Do you think the Charlotte Tilbury brand has been being pretty petty recently, or do you think these things are justified? Let me know your thoughts down below, and I will go ahead and see you in my next one. Bye.